Afternoon, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Cloud First Strategies Fueling the Future of Financial Services. My name is Dan Chicoine with FNTS, and I'll be your host for today. A couple housekeeping items before we begin. If you should have any questions during the session, please feel free to enter them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll save some time at the end to answer those. Also, this session is being recorded for awareness. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's panel. First up, we have Praveen Rawat. Praveen leads the technical strategy, capacity, and capability for Microsoft partners in the US. In this role, he is the virtual partner CTO for financial services partners in the US and has the support of cloud solution architect teams in Azure, Dynamics, and Microsoft 365 technologies, in which he has received awards for driving significant revenue impact through partnerships and has represented Microsoft at industry events. So welcome, Praveen. Next up, we have Chris Williamson. Chris Williamson has more than 25 years of experience with leading IT infrastructure, application development, and service delivery teams in business environments, ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies. He leads the development of next-generation capabilities and services that simplify IT operations, enhance cost savings, modernize applications, and shorten delivery times. Chris develops strategic partnerships and long-term digital transformation initiatives and has extensive knowledge of partner-driven solutions to help organizations meet overall growth strategies. Robert Lamagna-Ryder. Robert is the CISO at FNTS and is a strategic advisor that consults with organizations to help them implement information security strategies and roadmaps through risk management, strategy and mitigation tactics, architecture and engineering, and regulatory compliance and IT governance. Leveraging more than a decade of industry experience, Robert holds several industry certifications: CHP, PCIP, CISSP, CISM, and security, plus more. All right, we're going to get the presentation lined up here. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Praveen, and he's going to talk a little bit today about some of the industry tech trends that we're seeing out there specific to the financial services industry. So Praveen, with that, go ahead and take it over.
Thank you very much, Dan. Very happy to be here. So Microsoft worked with McKinsey and other advisory firms to produce a report which we call the 6 shifts shaping the next normal in banking. And many of these trends also apply to capital markets as well as to insurance. The very first trend that we see in this post-pandemic era is an accelerated shift to digital offerings such as online payments, mobile banking, virtual wealth management, adoption of e-commerce, contactless payments, etc. It's a no-brainer that commerce is moving online at a very rapid speed. If you just look at Teams, for example, we had less than 40 million active users of Teams before the pandemic. Now we have more than 145 million active users. And it's the same case with every cloud service that we have on Azure and other platforms that we have. The second trend is also a no-brainer. This is the increased use of remote workforce. Now, obviously, right after a pandemic, many offices are reopening, but very few, if any, offices are reopening at full capacity. Remote work is here to stay. And this is good for the P&L of banks and other financial institutions. So being able to support remote work is very key. We also see an increased use of remote relationship management. And first of all, my apologies for some noise in the background. But if you look at the way that the wealth managers are now managing relationships, when they think about how they're going to start managing those, they're looking at remote work as a permanent solution for their tier 2 and tier 3 clients. So Yes, they will definitely have one-on-one consultations with their high net worth clients, but then tier two and tier three, they're going to continue relying on remote work to fuel that engagement and customer insight. Now, all of that is going on, but at the same time, we have that ever presence of compliance needs. So, as we know, in the last 10 years, in a decade, banks have paid more than $280 billion in regulatory fines. And this is just increasing in today's day and age. In fact, there's an estimate that banks and other institutions are having to use more than 20% of their IT budget year over year to support the new needs of regulatory compliance. And as we see more and more production grade banking core and capital markets applications move into the cloud, now these are tier one production critical applications and services. They need a very high level of compliance and security. So that is definitely a major trend that we see. Another trend that is fueling compliance is the fact that many of the tier, you can say the smaller banks are becoming mid-sized banks. Many mid-sized banks are becoming bigger banks. As we know, wealth management, the capital markets are doing very well. The markets are up, wealth management is up. That means many small banks become bigger banks, and what happens with that is they now fall under additional compliance regulation as now they're in a new phase of their growth. So we're seeing this big push of more and more volume coming into the regulatory compliance space. Now, with all this work happening digitally, online commerce, compliance needs, remote work, there is that ever growing threat of cyber attacks and security. We are seeing more cyber attacks than ever before. In fact, there is a report out there saying that 2 to 5% of the world's GDP is money laundering. And out of the transactions that were flagged as fraudulent transactions by institutions, the government agencies such as Interpol and FBI, etc., were only able to pursue less than 10% of those flagged transactions. The government does not have the capacity to safeguard the financial services industry. The best way to safeguard is prevention. And so having security, having compliance, having partners such as FNTS who can secure and manage services is going to be key going forward. So these are some of the major trends that we have in the FSI space. And with that, I'd love to hand over, Chris, to you to talk about some key insights on cloud migrations and industry specific technology solutions.
Sure. Thanks, Praveen. Yeah, no, it's certainly, a rapidly changing workspace, in the financial services sector. The banking and financial services customers that we work with are kind of constantly having to navigate some of those challenges that you noted around growth, around compliance. But I think some of the foundational stuff around, looking at cloud migration, particularly in the financial services sector, there's really some core building blocks there. So I'm going to take you through a couple of those. Firstly is really kind of establishing a clear business case. Like any important business initiative that you would undertake, you need to make sure that that business case is solid, and that there's support within the business, within your line of business leadership to support that. So that's something we spend a lot of time with our clients on, is really kind of helping to pin that down and helping them sell that internally. And then secondly is really kind of broadly communicating that business case, including the cost benefits, the security and compliance advantages, and the transition plan of how that's going to go, because that would be really key to accelerating the effort. Um, Beyond that, it's really having a clear sight line to what your current state is. And organizations that we work with have kind of a variety of footings as it pertains to their understanding of their current state technology and their current state operations. But for example, financial systems typically have a wide range of integrations, across payment, clearing, settlement, analytics, mobile platforms. And all those need to really kind of be accounted for and identified, as part of your building your strategy to move to cloud. Right, so having clarity around that is really important. Also having inventory and then a clear understanding of the processes and data flows that align with those technologies, along your business segments is super important to having a good outcome, as you build your cloud migration. And additionally, that kind of informs your choice of cloud model too, and what might work best for your organization. Next, as Praveen said, is really around the compliance and security requirements. Of course, every financial services organization needs to mind the compliance and security requirements, to keep those front of mind. And particularly as Praveen mentioned, as these organizations scale and the landscape continues to change on them, it's really important. And that's why at FNTS, we've really worked to build that kind of tailored financial services environment that creates an advantage for our customers by taking a lot of those considerations off them and really being in front of those challenges, and then consistently working to be ready to face the next pivot as it pertains to compliance or the next security concern. Next, our teams really focus on sizing and architecture, and obviously that's a key building block to getting your cloud migration correct. Our folks are really good at sizing and architecting workloads in the cloud. It's really what they do best. And once you've identified what workloads you're going to need to move, our team really works to see how that's going to flow, what that's going to look like, both from a cost and a configuration standpoint, so that there's visibility to the future state before that migration actually begins. And that really is helpful in selling that back to the business and really getting their buy-in and reinforcing the business case for your transformation. Also, workload performance can be a real wild card. We found that changes the math around your cloud cost. So it's really important to validate that you're getting the price performance dynamics that you want from the cloud that you selected. So that's another key aspect. And then, lastly, the organization resource availability is really important to coming out with a good outcome, good business outcome. Making sure that your team internally has the bandwidth to take on the migration, because it is going to be impactful on them for during that period of time. While partners like FNTS can pick up most of the transition resource needs, many of the financial services IT teams that we work with are already kind of thin or overloaded. So carefully assessing their roles and responsibilities in the transition program is really important, and we work with our clients to really kind of make sure that there's coverage of all of those important activities. It also helps in projecting what those future state roles and responsibilities for your team are going to be, and what kind of training and staffing model will fit best in your future state, in your cloud model. And certainly managed providers will help by bringing internal teams through those actual scenarios, how they're going to operate in the future state, and validate their understanding of that. So that's just kind of a brief summary of some of the things that we see, the best practices, of really looking at how you bring your financial services platforms into a cloud model. So Praveen, one of the things that we've talked a lot about internally with our customers is this shift to kind of a multi-cloud solution, and I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk a little bit about that, and really kind of and hear what you're seeing from the Microsoft side, and see if it aligns with what we're seeing as well. That our customers are really looking to select the best cloud for their platform, and really starting to uncover the value proposition of the hybrid cloud, and putting workloads in the best environment where they get the best cost performance and there's economies of scale. I think the other key factor, maybe you've seen this too, is just the increased maturity of cloud operations and platforms, especially as it relates to controls and compliance, is one of the big factors that have given there's been more acceleration in the financial services and economy to really adopt this model now. And it's certainly, I know Microsoft's been focused on, really providing that tailored financial services environment as it matures just from kind of where it was as an infrastructure platform as a service, solution initially to now a more full-fledged option. And I think the other thing that we've seen is, our clients really like having a team that's actively working day in and day out to identify kind of what the next compliance hurdle is, what the next big vulnerability is, and be just completely focused on that, allowing their internal teams to really focus on business outcomes, focus on better customer experience for their financial clients, and be ready to adapt to whatever their next pivot is. Is that kind of what you've seen too, Praveen, in your segment?
Very much so. And many of our customers are going to stay in hybrid models for the foreseeable future. Many of them have very stringent sovereign requirements. We have customers in Saudi Arabia, UAE, other places where they have very stringent requirements there. We also have some workloads, for example, in capital markets, where there might be a 4 second or 5 millisecond latency requirement, and just the length of the pipe is what determines that latency. In that situation, we will have some analytics and other applications, peripheral applications on the cloud, but the core ticker plant in that situation could be inside an on-premises location connected to peripheral applications. Now that is changing, but for the foreseeable future, we do see 100% many customers, many partners staying in the hybrid model, and we have been planning for that. So in the Build conference last week, we made announcements around Azure Arc as an example. We already had Azure Stack, which is a hardware way of creating a hybrid infrastructure. But Azure Arc brings with it a more software way of doing hybrid cloud, where it brings consistency and security across multiple clouds. And we support not just on-premises along with Azure, but also our competition. So for example,
Great.
AWS and
Well,
Google
thank you,
Cloud
gentlemen.
are also supported by Azure Arc, the underlying software layer being Kubernetes. So as long as you have Kubernetes, you can now run not just data services like PostgreSQL, infrastructure services like virtual machines, but in the Build conference last week, we also announced compute services like functions, app services, etc. So now we can have end-to-end CI/CD with applications, data, the whole tier, all three tiers moving into a hybrid infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I think that's exciting to see how the solutions are unfolding to really kind of meet those challenges and meet customers where they are, and trying to find the best alignment and really try and create agility. I think last year certainly served to illustrate a few things around our abilities or lack of abilities of being able to pivot quickly and move with our customer base. And certainly last year and into this year has really underlined, the security complications, with the multi-cloud model. So, I want to bring Rob into this conversation to really kind of talk about, what, he's seeing, in the security world, relative to, cloud models, and what are the challenges that our customers are seeing, and how they're overcoming them. What are you seeing?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I wasn't already looking at the landscape, I would be just overwhelmed, right? We talked about a lot of things in the last few minutes, right? We talked everything from microservices, hybrid cloud architectures, and then you have quite a few of those organizations in the financial services space that might have some applications that require modernization. So how do you bridge all that gaps when you're dealt with the triple whammy of security, compliance, and now privacy, right? So if we start off with some of the very, very bare basic stuff like FFIEC, OCC, and FDIC requirements, if you're regulated by those entities. And then when you start getting into, credit card processing, you have PCI DSS. If you're a public organization, Sarbanes-Oxley. And then you also have GLBA. And outside of the industry mandated regulations, You also have framework and common control requirements, whether it's a SOC 2 Type 2, your ISO series of control sets, and so on. And that's just in the compliance framework space. In the privacy space, if you operate in and around any of the states that have recently passed legislation, and nearly half of the United States locations are some sort of legislation is in process or has been passed. If you do business in California, you now have a new version of the old CCPA that is now CPRA, which looks very much like GDPR. So knowing that financial services, the importance we place on the relationship with our clients, being aware of how privacy plays into our security and compliance decisions is just as important, because the fines from a regulatory standpoint and compliance are going to ratchet up. And as Praveen mentioned earlier, with banking institutions, credit unions, fintechs, and so forth increasing in size and the jurisdictions, all of a sudden you're moving up the sliding scale on how much you have to have a focus on your control structure and how much is in scope for your audit. And then you look at information security, and if going through the pandemic-induced changes on the threat landscape didn't already cause some folks to reevaluate their priorities, we're now seeing the ramifications of the focus, right? So number one of the post-pandemic paradigm shifts is social engineering is thriving more than ever. We are now taking the crown jewels or access to the crown jewels in our businesses home with us or around the world. You're seeing ransomware and targeted attacks on industries that have historically not been, prime targets, and that's not going to change, right? Even though historically a credit card number or financial account information, it may be not valued as much as healthcare information, it's still plentiful and out there, and they make prime targets. You start looking at vulnerabilities that are weaponized even quicker, the day it's announced as being exploited. So when you're talking about hybrid cloud environments, you're talking about containers. If you're talking about how do you merge and blend security seamlessly into CI/CD processes, you need to have that visibility from start to end to be able to assess your risk posture in real time. And a financial services cloud makes that easy for folks to consume because it's all built in and natively accessible. And then I think we need to take into account that a long view is required, that these challenges and problems are not going away. The goal line will continue to shift. So we need to be focused on a set of measurable KPIs and metrics, areas that a financial services cloud can help provide the foundation, help you build and mature on, right? So we're tracking everything from SLA, recovery time, uptime, the mean time to identify and respond to incidents and resolve that. And here later on, we'll start talking, how do you bridge the complexity between all of these, leveraging that financial services cloud. The root of all of that is moving and migrating the information security, compliance, and privacy programs to implement these principles by design, consume what's natively available, and operate under a zero trust model, which is what we'll get to here in a little bit. So that was a lot we just threw out there, right? So let's start with one of the most operational impacting assets within information security, how it ties into this multi-cloud world and the notion of how a financial services cloud can make life a little easier and reduce the noise and complexity. We have a lot of challenges. Instead of making capital investments for hardware or refresh or even updates to the firmware, our applications and so forth, a lot of that, in addition to your security solutions, is baked into a financial services cloud. So you're taking a lot of those tasks, transitioning them to one of the hyperscale providers or partners like FNTS to free up time and energy for the workforce so that we can focus on the areas that organizations typically find a lot of the struggles in, right? And as Chris and Praveen mentioned, you got to define your strategy, training and realigning your teams. If we're not marching to the same beat, if we're not involving information security, compliance, and privacy into those transformational activities, we might find out we have data sprawl or inconsistent control application across the environments. And that's ripe for findings or MRAs from the FFIEC if you're a regulated institution. if you have a finding from an external audit firm like a Deloitte or KPMG and you issue a SOC 2 report for your services, you want to do whatever you can to make sure that your report's not qualified, right? Because then your clients and customers will begin to question the sustainability of the operational processes. All of these are areas that you can rely on partners like Microsoft and FNTS to have done a lot of that groundwork to help you have a foundation to build upon and leverage what is in place to help you to focus on solving your day-to-day activities. One of the areas that we also increasingly stay focused on is maintaining industry contacts, right, and staying current or ahead of regulatory changes. That's one of the benefits of a financial services or a purpose-built cloud, is that we're working with partners and regulators across the board and working in actively changes to either legislation or required frameworks into into our solutions. One of those examples is taking a look at some of the draft changes that are coming in PCI DSS 4.0, which will be released in the coming year, and that's going to greatly expand the control framework set. So if you're consuming the services of a financial services cloud and your security program is leveraging the capabilities built in, you're going to benefit from those changes being updated and implemented throughout the cloud versus having to retool your own compliance framework from the ground up. So the level of effort is greatly diminished, and the value, the time to value is greatly increased. In addition to, when you're selecting a cloud service provider, organizations also want to foster partnerships. And that's also what FNTS and Microsoft bring to the table, that can provide you that real-time visibility, a consultative and collaborative approach that we can partner with your IT teams and your business teams where there might be skill or knowledge gaps. As Chris Praveen mentioned, a lot of the legwork is initially in the upfront planning, because the technology is usually the quickest part. We have to understand and blend and merge the culture aspects, the technical aspects, to get a seamless, homogeneous solution that's going to enable you to build in by design security, privacy, and compliance. So between the different approaches, between public, private, hybrid, we know that the cloud is a strategic enabler, right? We're aligning the enterprise strategy to simplify and modernize our IT environments. And due to the sensitive nature of the data that financial services organizations have access to or control, we face mounting risks and challenges. We have to make sure that we follow the principles, again, of zero trust. You might have seen it in President Biden's legislation incentivizing government agencies to embrace some of these principles. You're going to see a natural progression from industry leaders such as the NIST or the Cloud Security Alliance, and it's going to funnel down to entities like the FFIEC or the OCC or the FDIC. And what we're advocating for is simplicity, protecting the data, applications, assets, and services. And that sounds like a daunting task at first, but when you look at the value proposition of a financial services cloud built on and blending the cloud, public cloud native capabilities and with the private cloud capabilities of maintaining the security around the data, we are blending and merging and providing that visibility at all entry points, right? Whether it's a SaaS offering, a platform as a service offering, infrastructure as a service offering, and normalizing the outputs so that the business can make the correct decisions on who has access to the data, where they have access to it from, and all of that's going to funnel and support your control activities. And the beauty of the partnership between Microsoft and FNTS is now you're at a foundational platform to simplify operations, be at a point where you could eventually leverage passwordless technologies and actually make your employee and customer experience more seamless while raising the bar on security. When we start leveraging some of those capabilities and principles of zero trust, you actually are in a position to better protect yourself from ransomware too, right? So let's walk through the stages of you hear in the news very, very frequently, organizations are taken down by ransomware, whether it's to a phishing email or an unpatched application or operating system or vulnerability that's taken advantage of in an organization. Partnering with FNTS and Microsoft on a financial services offering, we can help guide and recommend the appropriate control points and offload that from teams everything such as patching, user awareness, prevention activities on your actual devices, whether it be your workstations, your servers, and actually providing visibility into your SaaS and PaaS and infrastructure as a service components so that we're catching and stopping and preventing malware execution along the way. And the only way you're going to accomplish this is by ensuring you have a complete design from the start and that you have complete full visibility at the end. And we'll work with you and partner with you to make sure that that's realized at the end of the day. It sounds daunting, but at the end of the day, it goes back to the foundational requirements that we work with you to help build from the ground up. And as the future of the financial services industry continues to move more towards on the online purview and offering of services, it was mentioned that latency is also a key component, which is why we'd like to build in the security technologies along that path. So we're doing either a single or as few as inspection points as possible to support as quick as data transmission as possible. Organizations continue to also require redundancy and resiliency. So we start talking about multiple regions and investments and backups and disaster recovery solutions as well. Security, we've talked a lot about that, but we haven't talked a lot about the industry-specific solutions such as privacy. Privacy as a cloud service provider supporting a financial services cloud really comes down to giving organizations the capability to retrieve the data that's available when it's requested. We'll partner to help our customers interpret what those laws might mean, what their shared responsibility model looks like, and how they're going to have to respond to data subject access requests or how they're going to have to support the right to delete. But the critical component there is we're providing the foundational capability to enable organizations to find and search and manipulate that data across their entire spectrum. That's the value add that we bring to the table. And last but not least, I think that information security, compliance, and privacy professionals, depending on your team size, your expertise, they want to ensure that the organization has a positive experience. Because if we build it in seamlessly from the beginning, security, compliance, and privacy are best seen if you don't know we're there, right? It's best functioned if there's not a stopgap or a stopping point or a disruption in the business cycle that has to be accounted for. And that's what we work day in and day out to build into these solutions so that it's as seamless, as frictionless as possible, and you're consuming the latest and greatest capabilities as the attack surface and threats evolve. I think the other call out that extremely important. No longer do organizations need to hunt down, perform bake-offs for best-of-breed capabilities and technologies. No longer do they need to stitch together and integrate these solutions and try to achieve those actionable outcomes through maybe playbooks or information event management systems that don't produce near as much of the value outcome as they set out. By partnering with FNTS, Microsoft, and having those capabilities built in, all of a sudden the notion of security orchestration and automated response with the capabilities natively present, it becomes more actionable, more tangible, and you have to spend less time stitching together the APIs, less time for your security operations analyst and your engineers to normalize the use cases and outcomes, and they can spend more time delivering the risk mitigation values back to your business that are going to allow you to level up the program, whether it's on the FFIEC cybersecurity assessment tool or whether it's your PCI DSS level, or maybe you want to go from a SOC 2 type 1 to a SOC 2 type 2, right? You're moving up the scale on the intensity and depth of your compliance activities in the notion of supporting the increased business goals. So we covered a lot there. The team here is more than willing to have conversations to partner with you to help enable a seamless, secure, and enhanced experience to a financial services cloud. But kick it back over to Chris and Praveen for any final thoughts that we might have glossed over.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, what I would add is security and compliance is such a quickly evolving area, and the cloud is moving at such a quick rate when it comes to security and compliance. Many years ago, from the Microsoft side, we introduced the banking amendment, which gives partners such as yourself the right to audit any subscription that is a banking subscription. We obviously want to adhere to Basel IV and other regulatory compliance needs. And we have seen slow innovation and in Azure Security Center, Compliance Manager, the baseline tooling that we provide on Azure. Azure Security Center obviously being that location where you can look at your security posture, Compliance Manager being that location where you can apply SOC 1, SOC 2 blueprints and see where you're standing. And a few years ago, we really did not have many blueprints for financial services. Today, we have the underlying base level tooling, and that's really rapidly evolving. So what I would just say is, so glad to have partners such as yourself, such as FNTS, who can manage this fast changing compliance landscape, because it's a handful. And one point you made there, Rob, was very key. To be truly compliant, it's more than being reactive. Right? If you pay the fine and then you fix an issue, you paid the fine. That's not helping much. The real value is, as you mentioned, in that not DevOps process, the DevSecOps process, the security operations process, where you can be proactive, you can find issues proactively, and you can remediate issues using a automated process where there is minimum manual intervention needed. So very, very happy to see the work that FNTS is doing in this space.
I think what you both touched on, particularly Rob, what you're talking about, in terms of, the compliance burden on teams. A lot of the, financial services leadership folks, the C-level folks I talk to, are kind of they've been painted into this corner where they've been asked to, meet this ever-changing landscape of controls and security, while simultaneously being told that they need to be laser focused on driving business outcomes and impacting, the bottom line. But oh, by the way, they're struggling to just do the blocking and tackling around, infrastructure, updates and management, remediating, legacy technologies and trying to transform. That's a lot to keep in flight at any given time. So I think, where I'm hearing most of these folks go is, their interest in financial services cloud at Microsoft and FNTS is driven by the economies of being able to really shift focus, and letting us do these things at scale along with Microsoft to just really kind of leverage that, those changes to that operating model, and and really just turn their attention to aligning their team to business outcomes and really driving performance. It's really kind of seems to be the drive this year, particularly after last year's big pivots.
For all of our listeners, that you don't have to have this right from day one, as long as it's planned as part of your roadmap, and that we're going to step into that whole process of shifting left, right? And if you have not heard that notion before, as we talked about, it's pushing the requirements in the DevOps or DevSecOps lifecycle more, closer towards the foundational use cases, where more of your developers, your cloud engineers, or whatever the individual that's working on your core business applications and requirements, the security, compliance, and privacy considerations, controls built in from the ground up. It's maybe tied into some of your infrastructure as code or your automation. And that not only allows your security, compliance, and privacy teams to spend a little bit more time on governance and continuing to push down those updates, you can now, as Praveer mentioned, you can now incorporate automatic updates that are sourcing from these cloud native tools themselves into that process. And all of a sudden, your security operations and engineering teams can do what we refer to as shifting right, and actually doing more threat hunting, focusing on the outcomes of some of the incidents that we might have to investigate. And that gives us an opportunity to really evaluate what is an incident, because we know we're very incident heavy and incident happy in the financially regulated sectors, right? We got to document, track, and close out a lot of findings and events throughout the environment. So all of a sudden, if we have better visibility and more tight control over how requirements are funneled in, we're naturally going to, over time, see less and less incidents. the more guardrails and the more automated we make processes. And that's going to allow your team to focus on really shoring up the environment and focusing on delivering those value outcomes, in which you're able to better translate instead of just being, historically a cost center, right? As Chris mentioned, you're spending a lot of time and cycles just meeting basic compliance requirements. By continuing to build that in over time into the more automated processes and standardizing, your teams are going to be able to be leading with the heart of a teacher, advising other folks in the organization, staying abreast of changes, and really tuning and tightening the environment so that we are in that proactive state. So it sounds like it's a vision that's a long road to be realized, but the biggest first step is knowing that, one, it's possible, two, there's partners that can help, and three, it all just comes down to the requirements, and we want to start with the low risk and the low sensitive applications first and work our way in. We want to build up to the crown jewels in the environment, right? You don't want to start with the applications and data that's going to give you the most pain if we get it wrong, right? So we build in that roadmap where we iteratively improve on what we're trying to roll in and take advantage of in the financial services cloud. That way we have success stories, we can build momentum, and we can show that the actual outcomes are there and that we're tracking towards our metrics.
Yeah, and I would just add too, Rob, that certainly if any of our folks here on the webinar today are interested in building or evaluating their cloud strategy, if that's interesting to you, FNTS is happy to work with you and your team to develop a high-level projection of what is it going to look like to migrate your financial services platform to a cloud operating model. We help you build the TCO, we help you build the business case for change. And understand that. We do that as a free service for anybody on the line today. Just reach out to us at info@fnts.com, and we're happy to have a conversation.
That was very insightful and educational. And at this point, we want to go ahead and open it up to Q&A. So let me just see the first one here. I have heard that this might be more for you, Praveen. I have heard that the public cloud can be more expensive than originally thought. Are there tools out there to help manage the expense so it doesn't get out of control?
Yep, that's a great question. The public cloud is consumption based, as we know, compared to on-premises, which is fixed cost. So whenever it comes down to a consumption-based system, you want to make sure that there are guardrails and policies around that consumption-based system. So the way that customers and partners usually keep the cost in check is, first of all, if there is a development environment, then a managed service provider like FNTS can help build out what we call an Azure policy. The policy will say, okay, this is a development environment. Developers are using this to spin up compute services, maybe some data warehousing services, but they can only spin up these SKUs, these cheaper SKUs. Maybe those SKUs are discounted because they are part of what we call a dev test subscription. What we do by having these guardrails is those developers will not be able to spin up those Godzilla size machines which cost hundreds of dollars per hour, and suddenly end of the month or end of the quarter you are surprised by looking at your bill. So having a managed service provider build out those policies and guardrails eventually will lead to cost savings rather than incurring additional cost.
Great, thank you. Keeping on the cost theme, Chris, this one might be best for you. Can you talk about some of the long-term cost benefits of cloud migration?
Yeah, I know.
Great.
In kind of the history, as it were, of cloud migrations, it's interesting to see kind of how it's shifted over time and kind of where once the dust settles, our clients and folks in the industry have seen those benefits. I would probably say that the biggest things are really what I touched on earlier around just really being able to eliminate costs that are just really not adding a lot of value for a lot of organizations. particularly in the financial services sector, it's about, providing better customer outcomes, whether that's, loans or traditional banking or what have you. And so a lot of IT teams are really trying to skew their focus to those things and trying to eliminate, the overhead of managing technology, to the point that several, folks I work with are trying to get out of the data center almost entirely, as much as possible. And so what's happened is, over the longer term, now that some of these transitions have happened and the dust is settled, they're seeing a lot better business outcomes and better performance from their IT teams in delivering solutions, and focusing on how to more agilely address where their customer base is going. So I think those are probably the biggest things. And really, it's just also about partnership, to working with folks like Microsoft, working with providers to really just tightly become a better ecosystem of technology partners and providers that are really allowing transformational change to occur.
On the cloud is decreasing every month, because there's infinite scale and infinite storage available. So we benefit from the economies of scale. And there is a link if you want to calculate the total cost of ownership. You can Google, or, well, I would say you should Bing TCO calculator Azure, and that can be used to do an apples to apples comparison of TCO between your current estate and an Azure.
Great. That sounds like a really good resource there too. Thank you, Praveen. Our last question, it's kind of open for all of you, I guess, can jump in. We aren't a large operation. I'm really interested in exploring Azure further, but we don't have the resources on staff who know Azure are very knowledgeable. How would we get started in identifying what an Azure deployment and migration would entail? Questions we have. So I guess it's,
reaching out to folks like ourselves at FNTS and Microsoft is really the best place to start. We've got resources on our team. Our engineers are great at trying to unravel the nuances of technical platforms, understand kind of how that's going to look in the future state in an Azure world. And that's a process that we go through every day, just to try and provide that kind of predictive view of what your future state is going to look like, and really establish that business value of moving to the cloud.
safe to say, some learnings today when it comes to approaching your cloud strategy or migration. Today it really isn't not a one-size-fits-all solution. So this hybrid multi-cloud approach definitely top of mind. And also, the organizations must really keep security and regulatory compliance top of mind, especially specific to the financial services industry. So thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your insights. A note to the group here, there is a handout in the handouts tab up there, and it's basically the FNTS Financial Services Cloud overview if you'd like more information on that. On the slide here, you'll see all of our speakers' contact information along with their LinkedIn profiles. Feel free to reach out and connect with them in any of those formats as well. They'd love to take any of your answers and help you down the migration path. So thanks again, gentlemen, and we look forward to our next webinar series, and we'll see you all then. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.